Good morning everyone! On this blessed Saturday morning I felt particularly inspired to make something insane, so I did! This is so far probably my greatest work yet. I decided to make another cutting board, but using all the knowledge I gained from making everything else up to now. I started off by milling a big piece of maple, 2 pieces of cherry and some spalted birch by removing bark pieces. Following that, I made sure to cut them into properly sized chunks, making sure to cut off any pieces that had cracks or holes. This way I was left with beautiful, although warped strips of wood. Once that was done, I proceeded to plane every single piece to be as straight as possible so that glue up would be easier. I'm always scared of planing anything on a table saw, but unfortunately I haven't found a better way and I simply lack the space to get a jointer for this task. If you guys figure out some method to do this without using a jointer, please let me know, I would really appreciate it. Now that I had everything I needed, it was time for a glue up! I purposely didn't cut the wood into same thickness because I wanted my pattern to be a bit more random and with gaps. Once I glued everything, it was time to wait for 2 days. After 2 days I unclamped it and proceeded to cut the edges off to make sure that it was smooth and also to make sure that the total width does not exceed 12 inches since that's how wide my planer is. I actually ended up with almost 10-inch board, so my planer was more than happy and I had enough space. Now that this piece was ready, it was time to pass it through the planer. I started noticing my planer blades are getting dull and have actually chipped in one spot. I think next year I will have to replace the blades. Once everything was perfectly planed, it was time to cut it into strips. Here you want to make sure that each strip is as thick as you want the end grain board to be, plus another 1/4 of an inch that you will lose in the planer and while sanding. So I made my strip 2 1/4 inches thick for a total of 4 strips. Once everything was ready, I proceeded to glue everything up while making sure that the end grain was facing up. I clamped it really tightly and let it dry for a week. The reason why I let it dry for a week is because I had to make the border for the board. I needed a total of 4 borders, 2 borders consisting of 4 pieces of spalted birch and 2 borders consisting of 5 pieces of spalted birch. I tried my best to make sure that I matched the spalted lines on the birch as well as I could. Overall, I was very happy with the matching I did. It did work out. Once those pieces have dried for 2 days, I proceeded to plane them on the table saw. Unfortunately, one of the pieces has snapped into 3 pieces since the birch I used was surprisingly enough quite brittle. I do not know if it's the fact that it was spalted or something else, but this is by far the softest birch that I have ever got to work with. And now that I had my borders, I glued the side borders first, let it dry for 2 days, sawed off the edges so they were smooth. My GoPro actually didn't record the sewing part sadly enough because it's GoPro and it kinda sucks. And then I glued the top and bottom borders. The design was already starting to impress me. Board at this point was 18 by 12 by 2 1/4 inches. Once glue has dried up and everything was solid, I sewed the ends off again to make sure that they were super smooth with no marks left. I was actually getting onto the last steps here. So now that the edges were smooth, it was time for me to plane it to make sure that the top and bottom were smooth too. I kept planing it all the way until I hit 2 inches and a change in thickness. I understand that planing an end grain board might result in it shattering, but I simply did not have the space in my garage to purchase a drum sander to make sure it is smooth. So for now, I do have to stick to the planer. But this level of smoothness was still not enough for me. I had to sand it. I meticulously sanded it from 80 to 400 grit, making sure that the whole surface felt super smooth to the touch. And it still wasn't enough for me, so afterwards I followed up and wet sanded it again from 320 to 800 grit. This was done to make sure that the fibers of the wood that I missed by normally sanding would be sanded. When you apply some water to the end grain of the wood, the fibers that were down will stick up. Kind of like when you're shaving and try to get the best shave, you use shaving soap. This is a similar process. The water gets those fibers sticking right up to be picked up. Now that the whole board was slippery smooth, it was time to decorate it. First I added juice grooves using my fancy schmancy juice groove jig, instructions for which I have in my other videos. But even though I was using a jig, my hand did slip a little and one of the grooves ended up being slightly rounded instead of perfectly square. I also chose to add rounded corners to the top of the board and Roman OG board to the bottom so it can be picked up easily. Now the board was ready, but I wasn't satisfied with it yet. I had the urge to sand it even further, so I sanded it again from 400 to 1000 grit. I actually wet sanded it from 800 to 1000 grit, but that part of the video is missing. Thanks GoPro. It's causing me a lot of grief lately with how it functions. Now that I finally could say that I was happy with the board, I proceeded to oil it. This was the biggest holy crap moment for me. Before oiling it, I was pretty happy with how it looked like, but then I added oil to it and all the colors came to life. I couldn't believe that the board ended up way better than I expected. It was truly stunning. The whole board drank half a liter of oil that I applied in 3 coats over 3 days. Birch drank the most of it, by the way. As soon as I would add oil, it would instantly get sucked in by Birch. So once I reached the point where the board refused to take in any more oil, it was time to wax it. And wax it I did. With this one, I tried a new trick. I would wax it very slowly, giving it enough time for the waxing pad to heat up from the friction. It actually seemed to absorb wax even better than what I was doing before. So a new skill was unlocked for me. And it is it! My best creation to the date was finally completed. Did I make a mistake with the G-screw in the corner? Absolutely. Could I have somehow created a slightly better board given my current skill level? Probably not. I'm very proud of what I have created. However, I would appreciate feedback from you guys so I could be even better. Because at the end of the day, I'm still a beginner. If you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making this, please consider leaving a like and maybe subscribing. I try to release videos every Saturday morning. If you have any comments, questions, or just want to say hi, that is very welcome too. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next week. Bye bye!